Hey, good morning, friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Patio Ponderings. I'm Pastor Sue, and I'm so glad you decided to join me for this 13th episode this season. It is it's not cold out, but it's super foggy this morning, and so I find myself again on the patio that is by the fireplace in the sanctuary of Triune Lutheran Church. And the stories that I am thinking about are the parables we heard on Sunday that have to do with planters and seeds as images of the kingdom of God. And so what we discover in these parables is that the kingdom of God is like seeds that are planted, and despite the mystery of how they grow, they grow, they sprout, and they bear fruit. They bear an abundance of grain. And the other one was the parable of the mustard seed, in which the tiniest of seeds grows into the largest of branches, large enough to support the nests of birds. And so we have this kingdom image that is all about abundance, abundant and fruitful life, a life that is sustaining and nourishing. And what that looks like in Jesus Christ is love and compassion and radical inclusion and forgiveness and mercy and all of those amazing things that Jesus teaches us. So, in thinking about the images of the kingdom, we talked about how do we recognize the kingdom out in the world? How do we pay holy attention to see where Jesus is present and where this kingdom is growing and producing fruit in the world? Because the world is a crazy, dark, hard place sometimes. You know, when we listen to the news, it's all about war and intolerance and politics and violence and natural disasters, and it just feels hard sometimes to see where this kingdom is emerging, where Jesus is showing up. So we talked on Sunday about paying attention so that we might take that in. But I was listening to a podcast this week that has me turning around that question a little bit. So in thinking about the church and in thinking about myself and those of us in faith communities who are representative of the kingdom, I'm pondering if other people, when they pay attention to us, either as individuals or as a community, if they pay attention to us, are they seeing the kingdom of God in us? Are they seeing in us abundant life and love and care for the other and compassion and all those things that we are supposed to be paying attention to? And here's why this question got turned around for me. And that's because I was listening again to this podcast. They were interviewing a couple of guys who recently came out with a book called The Dechurching of America. And in it, they talk about this huge shift that has happened. Over the last 25 years, 40 million people have left their houses of worship. This doesn't mean they don't belong in God. Doesn't mean they don't believe in God. It doesn't mean they have lost faith, but they have left those places where we expect people to engage in their faith. And of course, there's a whole spectrum of reasons. The biggest chunk of that spectrum has happened mainly for what they call kind of boring, pragmatic reasons. It's about the nature of life, that we are busy people, we are caregivers as parents or children, that we have more pressure to figure out ways to flourish economically, and so we're working more, we're working harder. We've also found other places in our lives that fulfill the same functions sometimes as worship has in the past. We find our sense of purpose in our work. And then there's a whole another segment of people who have left the church because of, maybe you're expecting this, politics, both on the extreme left and the extreme right. Also hypocrisy was a big one. Scandal. There's been a lot of scandals in churches, lack of transparency, and being wounded by the church. So the question is which churches, though, are experiencing less of this? Which churches are actually growing in the midst of this huge dechurching? And it's really interesting. It is those churches who have gone back to the basics, so to speak, who have returned to the kingdom of God and the person of Jesus that we find on the pages of the gospel in our scriptures. This Jesus who lived and died and was raised for us to give us life and redemption. But the Jesus that calls us to a sacrificial life that is not focused on ourselves, but on our neighbor. And so does a Jesus that calls us to a life that is about love of neighbor. And this is a countercultural Jesus, because this goes starkly against our American tradition, our American trends that focus on ourselves and our own needs. And it also, it's churches where people can find a sense of community that they cannot find in other places. It's the churches that reflect who Jesus is in a way that's relevant and compelling enough for them to kind of get over those pragmatic reasons of not being able to attend. So that was maybe a little bit of an inelegant way of getting through those reasons, and but that brings me back again to the question of, when other people pay attention to us as followers of Jesus, as a community of faith rooted in Jesus, are they seeing this compelling, relevant Jesus who steps out of the pages of the gospel with love for all people, with forgiveness, with healing, with redemption? Do they hear the story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection as being for them? Big questions, certainly. And again, I've covered a ton of territory here. I'm going to link the podcast below. You can take a listen if you have a chance. I would love to hear what you have to think about it. It's super interesting and should make us all think. But my hope for you is that you are paying attention to the world, and in your paying attention, that you indeed encounter Jesus and Jesus' love, and that it gives you life and nourishment in a way that you can reflect that love to other people. Hope to see you Sunday. Have a great day. Bye.